Hello friends, and welcome to day 24 of our daily chronological Bible reading and commentary. I'm Kenny, and I appreciate you joining us today. I'm a pastor in East Texas, and I make these videos to hold myself accountable to thinking more deeply about the Word as I read through it, and also to hopefully encourage some of you. So today we're going to be in Genesis 35 through 37. Now if you haven't read that yet, pause the video, go read it, and come back. Now, today we're going to see several things. We're going to see how God works through time and history in order to bless His people and to fulfill His promises. And we're going to see how God works through some negative things as well in order to fulfill His plans. So let's jump right in and take a look at the activity and the happenings of Genesis 35 through 37. Now, the first thing we see is God tells Jacob to go to Bethel, or Bethel as we would say it in English, in order to go there and to worship God and to establish himself there. Jacob obeys God and goes where God has told him to be, and sets up an altar in there and worships God. And there God appears to Jacob and tells him a couple of things, reminds him actually of a couple of things that he has said to Jacob before. One is that he reminds Jacob of his promise. The promise he gave to Abraham, the promise he gave to Isaac, and the promise he had earlier given to Jacob, that he would make him a great nation. So God reminds Jacob of his promise. We see this consistently in Genesis, that God is constantly reminding his people of his promises, just like he has given us the scripture to remind us of his promises, and that he is going to be faithful to those promises over time. The second thing we see is that God is renaming Jacob from Jacob to Israel. Now we saw that in the previous reading, but it didn't stick. Even the scripture continues to say, refer to Jacob as Jacob instead of as Israel. But this time God appears and God blesses him and says, you will be called Israel. And from this point forward, we know that Jacob is referred to as Israel. That's why the Israelites, the Jews, are referred to as the children of Israel. And so we see that. And so that story kind of ends there. And then it picks up with the story of Esau and God's making Esau into a great nation. And it's simply a genealogy, primarily a genealogy, that shows us that the children of Esau become the nation of Edom, which later on is important in the lives of the Israelites. So we record that, so we know God has been faithful to Esau as the firstborn of Isaac. So we see God's faithfulness at the same time that we see God's discipline, and it's all wrapped up in together. Now, as we continue on, the story shifts to the story of Joseph, right? Now, Joseph is the youngest son of Israel, or Jacob, and he's apparently much younger than the rest, and so he's at home, and this is a story you may be familiar with if you grew up in church. You know the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. Well, Joseph is staying at home while all of his brothers are out in the field tending the sheep. And one day, Jacob sends Joseph out to check on his brothers. Well, when his brothers see him coming from afar, they're very jealous of him because he's the brat younger brother, right? He's staying at home. He doesn't have to come out and do the work they did. He's their dad's favorite. There's all this mess going on. So Jacob comes, and some of the brothers determine they want to kill Joseph. So as he approaches, though, Reuben, the oldest brother, convinces the others not to kill him, but instead to throw him into a cistern that was there that had no water in it, and to just hold him there for a while. Well, when Reuben wasn't looking, the brothers saw a caravan, a slave trader that came through, and so they sell Joseph into slavery. And those slave traders take him to Egypt, where he is sold into slavery. And that's where the story will pick up tomorrow. Now, what do we get from this? Well, a couple of things. One, we see that God is revealing himself over time to the children of Abraham. You see, remember, at this time there is no scripture. There's no written Bible for them to go back and look at. It's all what God has revealed to them as they seek God. They're people headed in a Godward direction, but they don't have everything they need to know yet in order to walk with him well. So they make lots and lots of mistakes along the way, some out of ignorance, some out of evil hearts. But they make these mistakes. We see this at the start because when Joseph heads off to Bethel, then he cleanses his household. And one of the things they have to do is get rid of all their idols. So even these people who had seen God's hand were still worshiping idols. So they were imperfect, but headed in a Godward direction. Let me encourage you, God's plan for you is not that you live perfectly, though that would be great. His plan for you is that you move in His direction and you follow His path. You know, I see this as kind of a trail of breadcrumbs. So for that, let me, if you remember the story of Hansel and Gretel, they followed a trail of breadcrumbs into the forest, or they left a trail for them to follow to get home. And so it's like trail markers or directions on a GPS that God gives us to guide us and let us know we're on His path. We see this very clearly in the story of Joseph because he has dreams. The whole mess starts with him having dreams about his brothers bowing down to him, and even his parents bowing down to him. And it made all of his brothers mad. But what God was doing for Joseph was giving him a picture of what was coming in the future, so that when Joseph went through the hard times, he could endure. He would know that there was something to hope for. And so we see this really miraculous thing going on. And you can see this in our own lives. I promise you, if you will look to the Lord and say, God, show me the next step, God will give you a sense of direction and He will guide you to the next place. You just have to want it. Now, you don't have to want it perfectly. There's this fantastic story where a man came to Jesus with his son who needed to be healed. And the man came to Jesus and he said, if you can, will you heal my son? Jesus said, if I can? And the man said, I know you can, but help me in my unbelief. And the man's anxiety about the possibility that he might be wrong and his desire to see his son healed, but to not be disappointed, he had this doubt, this question, but he still acted in faith. And so God desires for us to do the same thing. We see Joseph acting in faith when he goes to Bethel. We see, Jacob acting in faith when he goes to Bethel. We will see Joseph acting in faith here in the future, and that'll be a big deal in the chapters to come. So I appreciate you joining me here for day 24. That's what I have for you today. Love you guys, and we'll see you on day 25. Have a good day.